Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We're going to pick up again with lesson number 5 on the Great War or the World War One. What we're going to do, of course, is start with the unit focus question. As we always tell you, we give you these unit focus questions to kind of guide you in terms of what the main idea for the unit is going to be about. The question is what factors caused World War One and caused the United States of America's involvement. The Do Not activity is a journal topic. Identify as many weapons of war as you can. We'll give you a few minutes to kind of create a list, and we'll come back in a few seconds and we will talk about that list. Okay, when you look at that list of weapons, of course, it could have meant any number of things. You could have, of course, said that, regular guns or whatever, but you could have said something like machine guns, tanks, rockets, airplanes, submarines, battleships. There are any number of different innovations that you could have talked about when you're talking about modern warfare. We call World War One the Great War because it is one of the first great modern wars. And we call it that because of the different innovations, of course, that will come. And we're talking about those innovations, things like the tank, things like poison gas, things like the machine gun. What we're going to do, of course, is identify some of these vocabulary terms as we go. If we miss one, go ahead and look them up on your own, of course, and you can create your own definition. You probably learn a little bit more about it that way anyway. Lesson focus questions for lesson number 5 would be the following. What innovations caused World War I to become a grossly violent conflict? What impact did the United States' interest in the war have on the eventual outcome? And what was Wilson's vision for peace following World War I? Well, we're going to start with World War I, a new modern war. When we talk about it as a modern war, the creation of a network of trenches signaling the devastation that World War I would create. Now, unlike most wars that fought before that were violent also, World War I takes and amplifies the amount of violence, of course, that we see. It would, thousands of people, of course, could die in battle in a relatively short period of time. In order to offset that, especially with the machine gun fire, trenches, of course, were dug. And then, of course, men, of course, be in those trenches. And we're going to find that the fighting is going to drag on because of that trench warfare. Weapons advancement to overcome the trenches included poison gas, zeppelins, and airplanes that would be used in battle. And then, of course, the tank that would pretty much wipe out trench warfare, because what you could use then is the tank, of course, to overrun trenches. The American Expeditionary Force, when we look at the United States of America's involvement, remember, once again, we've talked to you about the fact that the United States of America initially wasn't involved in the war. But when we did get involved in the war, 2 million soldiers, or who we were called the Doughboys, were the first arriving in by convoy to protect them from German submarines. And what they would basically do is come over on these ships, and these ships, of course, would be these passenger ships. These ships, transport ships, would bring the soldiers, of course, and then supplies over, and then they would be protected by American battleships. As the U.S. was preparing to enter World War I, Russia, of course, was leaving the war. And they were leaving because they were having a revolution in their own country, and they couldn't adequately defend themselves in fighting World War I. So because of that, we're going to find that the Russians, of course, drop out, and the United States of America drops in on the Allied side. General John J. Pershing was the leader of the AEF, the leader of the Doughboys in World War I, and they arrived there in Paris on July 4th, 1917, and Americans fought under Pershing, not under the British or the French banner. Now, we are going to find that there is going to be an integrated unit in this particular conflict of African American soldiers that will fight with the French, and they're going to fight with great distinction and receive something called the Croix de Guerre. Here's the AEF and the Doughboys marching as the British troops arrested alongside the road. Here you have John J. Pershing, nicknamed Blackjack, who was the leader of the AEF, the American military impact. So what impact did the United States of America have when we entered the war? Well, you have to understand that the nations of the rest of the world had been fighting for 2 years. The United States of America was relatively fresh. When we came in, whoever side that we came in on, it was going to be a tremendous advantage to that particular side. The Germans launched their largest offensive to take Paris in March of 1918. Initially, the offensive was a success as the Germans were able to push inside of 40 miles of Paris. But when the Americans supported the French troops at that particular time, at the battles of Cantigny and the counteroffensive in German defeat at Saint Mihiel, the AEF defeated the Germans at Argonne Forest and crippled the German war effort and completely with all practical purposes ending the war. Here, we have some American heroes, of course, recognized for valor during World War I. Alvin York from Tennessee received the Medal of Honor. and the Croix de Guerre. And then on the right, we have the 93rd Infantry, and they received the Croix de Guerre for valor, of course, in fighting with the French. The end of World War I, by November 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, both undergoing political turmoil, had surrendered to the Allies. Both empires broke up and new nations declared their independence. Germany also suffered internal turmoil as their emperor stepped down in late October of 1918, and an armistice was signed, and the fighting stopped on November 11, 1918, which ended World War I. The challenge of peace, the Big Four, each had with an agenda, met in Paris at the Palace of Versailles to decide the fate of Germany. The Big Four included Georges Clemenceau, of course, from France, David Lloyd George from Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando from Italy, and Woodrow Wilson, of course, in the United States. Wilson came up with the idea of the 14 points to prevent wars like this from ever happening again. The only problem with the 14 points is that some of the other nations had their own agenda and they wanted to punish Germany rather than create, conditions, of course, that would stop another war like this from happening again. And because of their failure to take Wilson's ideas about the 14 points seriously, we're going to be ended up fighting another war within 20 years, within 20 years or so with World War II. The elements of the 14 points included free trade, freedom of the seas, disarmament, the adjustment of colonial claims, the open diplomacy, and national self-determination, which would be outlined points 6 through 13 and help resolve border disputes between nations, and the creation of the League of Nations, which would arbitrate disputes between nations rather than have fights again. The Treaty of Versailles, Wilson's 14 points, was considered during the negotiation of peace, but France, embracing its opposition to some elements, hampered the implementation. And because of the idea of the League of Nations, the United States of America doesn't recognize doesn't accept the Treaty of Versailles, and we end up solving or signing our own peace agreements with the warring nations after the war is over with. So American opposition to the Treaty of Versailles, we had two groups, the irreconcilables, who proposed any involvement with the Treaty of Versailles because of the League of Nations, and the reservationists, who would approve the treaty if the amendments were added to the League of Nations that would limit the Americans being compelled to fight in any other conflict in Europe. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't approved in the United States. Instead, the U.S. negotiated peace, as we said earlier, with each of the Central Powers to officially end the war. The impact of World War I, the legacy included the breakup of the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian Empire, changing the map of Europe, 17 million dead, European landscape destroyed for years. It triggered the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which gave us communism. It acted as a prelude to how bloody wars would become, and it caused animosity between nations like France and Germany, which would lead to World War II. All right, the lesson focus question. Once again, what we try to do, of course, is give you some questions, of course, to kind of guide our ideas about what the most important portions of the lesson. What innovations caused World War I to become a grossly violent conflict? Poison gas, machine gun, airplanes, the Zeppelins, the tank. What impact did the United States' interest into the war have on the eventual outcome? We said because of the United States of America being fresh to the fight, and we bring 2 million troops and our U.S. industrial might in order to be able to make war materials, whoever the United States of America got involved on side would win this war. And we got involved, of course, on the side of the Allies, and the Allies won. And then what was Wilson's vision for peace following World War I? It was called the 14 Points, which would address all the issues that started the war and provide a means to prevent future wars. Remember, once again, this is just our take, of course, on the U.S. involvement in the Great War, and then some of the elements of the Great War. But don't take our word for it. Do your own research and go through and make up your own mind in terms of what you see. Remember, it's America's history, which means it's your history. We'll see you next time from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online.